Order. Order. Mr. Stewart Jackson to move the motion.
Mr. Hollowbone, I beg to move that this House has considered the matter of government support for pupils with English as an additional language. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Hollowbone, and I welcome the Minister to his place in the new government, my honourable friend, the member for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, who I've known for many years. This is a timely debate, aimed not at outlining a detailed policy proposal or indeed criticising what has gone before, but to invite the department and ministers to explore options as to how they can assist a small number of localities and local educational authorities to deal with the consequences of very large-scale immigration and pupil mobility, and specifically the impact that these factors have had, particularly on primary school education, the provision of primary school places, and teacher recruitment and retention, as well as, most critically, on educational attainment. As someone once said, it's déjà vu all over again, because Mr. Hollowbone, you were in the chair when I led a similar debate with the same minister on the 15th of February 2011 on the subject then of the pupil premium, and that was an occasion where I raised similar but not identical matters in that adjournment debate. On that occasion,
Attention. The fire alarms in your area are being tested. There is no need for you to take any action. A further announcement will be broadcast when these tests are complete. Attention, attention. The fire alarms in your area are being tested. There is no need for you to take any action. A further announcement will be broadcast.
Order. Order. Mr. Stewart Jackson would like to carry on. He could, of course, just refer us to the remarks he made in the previous debate and then sit down. But I hope he's not going to do so, and I hope he's going to add some additional material.
Thank you, Mr. Hollowbone. I'm trusting there'll be no incendiary activity in the next 15 minutes or hour and a half, indeed. On that occasion, I argued, evidently not that persuasively, it transpired, that whilst the pupil premium was indeed an excellent idea and a useful tool to assist the most deserving pupils with the deployment of scarce resources, that it was nevertheless a blunt instrument, in that it only related to deprivation as measured by the sole indicator of access to free school meals, and that it was perfectly possible to nuance and finesse that criterion in order to drive up education standards in discrete circumstances, and so it proved to be, because the coalition government in the last Parliament did indeed extend the provision of flat-rate pupil premium to looked after children, to pupil premium plus, and quite rightly to later to service personnel children. The deprivation indicator and eligibility criteria was also broadened, as was the differential payment rates between deprived pupils in primary and secondary schools. Per capita funding rose from £430 to £935, or £1,100 in primary schools, between 2011 and 2015 for deprived pupils, to £1,900 for looked after children and £300 for service children. I'm proud to be associated with the government that did that, and it did it for the right reason. Because there is plenty of evidence that the pupil premium has had some considerable impact cumulatively across a wide range of local education authorities in supporting disadvantaged children and improving their education attainment. The Department for Education report published in July 2013 under the auspices of TNS BMRB, Texas Centre for Equity in Education and the Universities of Manchester and Newcastle respectively demonstrated such positive outcomes as did Ofsted's pupil premium update published in July last year. Naturally, I'm delighted not just that pupil premium worked, but that the new Conservative government remains committed to maintain it, and for the current financial year it will be £2.545 billion. Indeed, 1 in 6 children in the Peterborough Local Education Authority were in receipt of free school meals in 2013-14. Mr Hollowburn, I accept the central premise that ministers have prayed in aid of the pupil premium, that the link between free school eligibility and underachievement was strong. This is undoubtedly the case, but are we to accept that it cannot be a more flexible vehicle in resource allocation? Because let us be clear as to what pupil premium has not historically and does not address. The fact is that there is now no de facto targeted funding for those local education authorities who, by dint of their economic profile or geographical circumstances, have to accommodate and deliver the best educational outcomes on an equal statutory footing with other and all LEAs to students whose principal language is not English. Pupil premium has been reconfigured, rebooted, nuanced, reset and expanded, but still regrettably fails to take account of the very real impact of large numbers of EAL pupils. With the demise of the Ethnic Minority Achievement Grant, dedicated funding has been removed effectively for EAL pupils. It was rolled up into the Dedicated Schools Grant in 2011-12 and effectively subsumed into mainstream schools funding. Current LEA funding formulae allows for support for LEA pupils for only up to a maximum of 3 years, and the bulk of LEAs in fact elect to fund for less time than that, either 12 or 24 months. That is despite the fact that research indicates that it will take between 5 and 7 years for EAL pupils to match the performance of their peers whose first language is English. National initiatives such as the British Council's EU-funded Nexus programme is good as far as it goes, but it's a national programme which cannot provide bespoke local solutions reflective of the knowledge, skills and experience of teachers, governors, parents and LEAs delivering the most appropriate local education service. Each LEA and each school has its own priorities. So, for instance, if you were seeking to get the best outcomes from a Somali or West African child in Southwark, it would be a completely different challenge to that of dealing with a Slovak or Lithuanian child in Peterborough, Boston, Wisbech or other parts of the east of England. It's disappointing that the strong advocacy and campaigning by Westminster City Council for a cash passport system for new entrant EAL pupils has yet to result in any government action or even, as I understand, a commitment to investigate its efficacy or commit to a pilot scheme. I'm at a loss to understand why EAL has not featured more prominently in the analysis of the impact on results of the pupil premium, both by the Department for Education and Ofsted since 2011. Now, this is not a generalist complaint about schools' funding, as I'm well aware that the government is committed to rebalance historic anomalies and unfair funding allocations with an extra £390 million for the least well-funded education authorities in the current year 2015-16. And in the interest of transparency, and lest I be accused by the Minister of being churlish or ungrateful, I concede that he himself committed to the Peterborough LEA a sum for exceptional circumstances grant of £1.5 million in 2010-11, for which we were extremely grateful, to deal with the EAL-related pressures. But that doesn't negate my case for a strategic and systematic approach and appraisal of such challenges over the medium and long term, and a focus on those LEAs most seriously impacted by these unprecedented population pressures. Because the fact remains that effectively there is no provision for EAL support in pupil premium funding. EAL is only one of a number of pupil-led factors used by local authorities to top up their basic allocation per pupil within the school's block grant funding. And in practical terms, Such considerations are effectively crowded out by other factors such as deprivation and prior educational attainment. For a small group of LEAs, the pupil premium therefore goes only part of the way in dealing with the huge societal and demographic changes and indeed massive challenges they face centred on EAL issues. Peterborough is encumbered by a vast array of such challenges. It has been described as like a London borough without the funding largesse in terms of its demographic profile. Whilst the number of EAL pupils in England has risen by 21% since 2011 to 1.19 million, in Peterborough it has risen by 46%, from 7,100 pupils to 10,395, the equivalent of 8 new two-form entry primary schools. The largest rise in Peterborough is in primary schools in years 1, 2 and 3, where over 40% of pupils are EAL and 34% across the whole local education authority. Nearly 70% EAL pupils in primary schools in my own constituency. Indeed, 2 Peterborough schools are over 90% EAL, Gladstone Primary and Beaches Primary, both in the Central Ward. In one Peterborough school, 192 pupils speak a language which is called other than English. The biggest increase is amongst Lithuanian speakers, 410 extra pupils, a 63% increase in just 3 years. Change is rapid. At one secondary school in Peterborough, 2 years ago, 40% of Year 7 pupils were EAL. It is now 70% in 2 years. I'm happy to give away to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way, and I congratulate him on securing this morning's debate. Given that it was based on the numbers of pupils involved, is he making a case for the reinstatement of the Ethnic Minority Achievement Grant as a way of solving the problem that he's outlining?
Well, I'll come on to elaborate on my reasoning, but it's a matter of public record that I did quote the effective abolition of the grant in so far as it was rolled up into the mainstream generalist schools, dedicated schools grant in 2011. And he will know that there was some specialist opposition to that decision. And there was a feeling that a deprivation-linked indicator alone was not sufficient to take account of the very large changes in school roles, one of them being, for instance, churn, which I'll go on to talk about shortly. Peterborough has seen huge organic population growth driven by new house building and inward migration. So it's gone from a population of 156,000 in 2001 to 184,000 in 10 years to the 2011 census, a 17% rise in population. But it also has a younger age profile than both the east of England as a whole or the United Kingdom. And since 2007, the City Council has spent £110 million on a capital programme to create 8,282 new school places. But even so, Peterborough was identified by the DfE in 2013, as well as the Local Government Association, as the 5th most projected overcapacity LEA in England, with a prediction of the city having a 24% deficit on primary school places by 2017. The city is also the second highest rate of in-year school admissions in England, and such churn is enormously disruptive, resource intensive, and has a major impact on educational attainment. Mr. Hollowbone, the 2013 Royal Society of Arts report, Between the Cracks, estimated the effect of each change of school on a pupil as equivalent to the loss of 1 term's worth of progress. Of the 1,263 headcount increase in the last year between October 2013 and October 2014 in pupils, 958 of those pupils have English as an additional language. That's 76% of the increase. And it's not just Eastern European children who represent the biggest challenge for schools. Peterborough's long-standing Pakistani community means that the growing preponderance of Punjabi and Urdu speakers, even fourth generation, for cultural reasons, results in many Pakistani heritage pupils struggling with English reading and writing. In 2003, the DFE commissioned a piece of research from Leeds University entitled Writing in English as an Additional Language at Key Stage 2, which examined this phenomenon. Such issues as non-standard entry, challenging work conditions, higher preponderance of deprivation and poor parenting, inadequate league table results at Key Stage 2 all make effective and suitable recruitment and retention of good and talented teachers an even bigger challenge than that faced by more traditional local education authorities. Not that long ago, a well-respected primary school head told me that in the last week, a Czech Roma family of 6 children with no English, who were poorly socialised and parented, had been enrolled in her school. Whilst not typical, that's not untypical for Peterborough. It's not something that every head, school or LEA has the skills, confidence or expertise to cope with, but Peterborough has had to cope, and over many years too. But the news is not all bad, of course. It's appropriate at this juncture to give credit to the work being undertaken in Peterborough to tackle what seems a series of insurmountable barriers, to pay tribute to the heroic efforts of classroom teachers, teaching assistants and head teachers, and to those in the LEA and others who, despite everything, have succeeded in developing an innovative EAL strategy. In an era where many LEAs have disbanded their in-house EAL specialist teams, Peterborough has grown its own talent and utilised the expertise from the team that developed the EAL element of the successful London Challenge programme. 38 schools have received on-site training and or consultancy, with a focus on school-based training, and schools like West Town Academy, Fulbridge Academy, Gladstone Primary, Longthorpe Primary, The Beeches Primary, Thorpe Primary, Highleys Academy, and Ken Stimson Community School in Warrington have all led the way as hub pathfinders and exemplar institutions, with an EAL reference group monitoring performance and developing new ideas through school-to-school contact and online training, data sharing with high-quality written materials and networking, all progressed against a detailed implementation plan. Inevitably, this bespoke strategy comes at some cost for mainstream school budgets, i.e. the direct schools grant. The cost to the LEA in the last financial year was almost £750,000, a not trivial sum for a medium-sized unitary authority. It is a mark of the strategy's success that the LEA has been able to defray a proportion of its revenue costs to an extent through selling on its skills and expertise to other education professionals. It is appropriate to recognise those who have worked so hard on behalf of the LEA to develop this important specialist work and beyond. And I thank Jonathan Lewis, amongst others, Gary Perkins and Graham Smith, who's here today, and the new leader of the City Council, Councillor John Holditch. In 2014, EAL attainment at Key Stage 2 rose by 7 percentage points. Modest, but it halved Peterborough's EAL attainment gap. Despite this, 12 of the city's 54 primary schools missed the benchmark for the Key Stage 2 SATs tests in reading, writing and maths. And disappointingly, the city languished at 148th out of 152 local authority areas for the performance of youngsters at Key Stage 2. Mr. Hollowburn, in many respects, the issues I raised in February 2011 are much the same, if not more acute and pressing. So if I may beg your indulgence, they do bear some repetition. You did invite me to do so. I said at the time, I will not go into minute detail about how resource-intensive those children are in terms of lesson planning, teacher training and interfacing with pupils' parents, many of whom do not speak English. Culturally, those parents do not need to speak English. Many are in low-wage, low-skill occupations where the need to speak English is not apparent. For example, even if Polish children are extremely good at science and maths and are generally very gifted, are up to speed in English and mathematics, when they go home there is no cultural predisposition to speak English. It's very difficult for them. Other children whose parents are less skilled from, say, Lithuania or the Czech Republic are in a situation where their parents contract for packaging fruit or picking vegetables in the fields of South Lincolnshire, Cambridgeshire or Northamptonshire finishes after 6 months. They then leave their rented accommodation, withdraw the children from school, or they may go to another part of the UK. It is debilitating and resource intensive to train teachers and to have the capacity to deliver real improvements and added value for those particular families. Now, I know that the Minister and his colleagues are committed to consulting on bringing forward a national schools funding formula. And EAL will inevitably play a part in such calculations. So may I suggest that given that the government remains strongly committed to maintaining relatively generous ring-fenced allocations for pupil premium, is it too much to ask that it considers developing a discrete and dedicated EAL challenge fund aimed at a small minority of LEAs, those with a demonstrable record of success of, inter alia, creating EAL hubs, centres of excellence, the skills and knowledge base, the human resources, leadership and strategies, which can be audited and are outcomes linked to and related to a small number of key performance indicators, which in turn are linked directly to education outcomes. I think the Minister would benefit from seeing the work being undertaken in my constituency, and I know he did come after our debate in 2011 to visit Fulbridge Academy to meet the excellent team there headed up by the principal, Ian Erskine, which incidentally has gone from strength to strength, given that they speak almost 100 languages in that school, and it's one of the largest schools in England, and they were rated as outstanding by Ofsted in their last Ofsted inspection. But I know he would want to see for himself, in responding to my cordial invitation to come to my constituency, the exceptional difficulties faced by teachers and by the City Council in the city. In any event, I would ask him to honour the undertakings made to me in 2011, in good faith, to look at this issue seriously, weigh up the evidence, talk to the professionals who helped deliver London Challenge, do a proper, rigorous and robust cost-benefit analysis and consider the longer-term cost savings which could be achieved by a modest, well-targeted and ring-fenced EL budget. I fear that teachers in Peterborough can bear the burdens placed upon them without extra help for not very much longer. I believe there is a strong case to be made, but this morning I hope merely to have provoked a much-needed debate. And if I can also quote the Minister from his superb speech last night in the second reading debate. I know the Honourable Gentleman for Cardiff West might not concur with that estimate, but he actually spoke with great passion about the moral imperative of education and the concept of one nation and actually driving up standards. And I think his words are resonant to this case. So I will read some of them, if I can. The bill is about social justice. It is another important step in ensuring that all our state schools are delivering the quality of education currently found in only the best, and that our adoption system is also efficient, so children can escape the unhappiness of a life of neglect or the uncertainty of life in care as swiftly as possible. And he went on to say, too, we want those standards for everyone, regardless of social or economic background. That is what we mean by social justice. It involves taking on the vested interest, which is why in this bill we are asking for powers to say no to those who frustrate or delay improvement, enemies of aspiration and rigour. If honourable members across the House believe in social justice, I urge them to support this bill. They were fine words, and they are true of the commitment to help all the children in my constituency, from wherever they've come, whatever their background, whatever their race, creed or colour, they just happen to be in Peterborough. Mr Hollowbone, irrespective of all those factors, every child in my constituency, and those of other honourable members, deserves the best possible education, and with some thought, a proper plan and a little political willpower, that's what they can get. The
question is that this House has considered government policy on support for pupils with English as an additional language. Carol Monaghan.
Thank you very much, Mr Hollowbone. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to talk a bit about my experience with pupils with EAL needs in my previous job as a teacher. First of all, I'd like to say that Scotland has a long history, a rich history of multilingualism. Throughout the ages, we've had various languages running through our culture, Scots, Gaelic, Irish and English. Yes?
I couldn't let that pass without pointing out to her that one of the finest poems in the Welsh language, the Gododdin, of course, was written in the south of Scotland in the early medieval period.
Thank you for that, and I'll add Welsh to that list as well. What we've seen over the last probably 20 years is an influx of people with different languages and different cultures. And the EAL pupils that we have dealt with in Glasgow have made a huge positive impact to our schools. I taught in a school in the inner city comprehensive in Glasgow. That was one of the schools where asylum seekers and refugees in the late 90s were actually housed. So we had a huge number, and what happened in that school was almost instantly attainment levels increased, because not only were these pupils really delighted to be in a school, but they also had a positive impact on other pupils, on the native Glaswegians there as well. And throughout the school, we saw a huge benefit from the EAL pupils being there. Mr Jackson was talking about the impact in primary schools, particularly about the large-scale immigration in terms of teacher recruitment and attainment. I would disagree fundamentally about the attainment, and I'll talk a little bit more about why attainment really benefits from having different languages. But in terms of teacher recruitment, I would agree that there is an issue. We need to be training teachers, and we need to be recruiting more teachers to support these pupils with additional needs. The Scottish Government is following EU policy on the 1+2 languages learned. We have the 1 refers to their native tongue, and the +2 is 2 additional languages, and that could be English, that could be French, that could be Spanish. But what we see more and more is the rise of Gaelic medium education, and for some of the pupils in Gaelic medium, actually English is not their first language either, so they're getting English support there too. I want to say a bit about Gaelic medium education. What we see now in Scotland is a lot of parents wanting to send their children to Gaelic schools, and attainment levels are increasing hugely. These pupils don't learn English until the age of 7, and by age 8 they've overtaken their peers who are in English-only speaking schools. So there's huge benefits of learning 2 languages, and there'll be huge benefits for the Polish children that the Honourable Member mentioned. My own children attend Gaelic medium education. I, unfortunately, have no more than pidgin Gaelic. So, unfortunately, when they come home, like the Polish children, I do not support them in their Gaelic education in the house. I can't help them with that. So they're only getting their native English language in the home. However, they're fluent in Gaelic, they're fluent in English. So I would suggest to the Honourable Member that actually these Polish pupils who are going home and speaking only Polish, they'll be getting 2 languages, and actually they've been further challenged and will develop far more schools. Yes.
I think she's making an interesting point, but I think she's somewhat missing the substance and the kernel of my argument, which is that as far as I know, there is no parliamentary constituency, district, region in Scotland where more than about 5% of people speak Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic. And she certainly hasn't ever experienced a situation where in a small city in Scotland you've had a rising population of 17% within 10 years, the vast bulk of whom speak Gaelic. So I don't think you can necessarily compare the two situations. I think she's rather obscuring the central premise of my argument.
Okay, well, first of all, we have areas of Scotland in the Western Isles, and my honourable friend Angus MacNeill would probably disagree with you. 5%, in fact, in these areas, there are Gaelic is still the native tongue for many of the people there, so far more than 5%. In terms of 70%, I'm not sure if there's any areas in Scotland that have 70%. We do have up to 20% of pupils coming in with English as an additional language. However, I'm trying to explain the benefits, and certainly in the school I was in that had a huge number, up to 50% of those pupils at that particular school had English as an additional language, and we saw attainment levels rise greatly. In terms of the pupil premium that the honourable member spoke about for the additional funding for, at the moment that is for disadvantaged pupils, and he spoke about including possibly or using some of that for EAL pupils. I think there's possibly an argument that we need to be looking at dedicated funding for EAL pupils. There is a positive impact that they make, but we need to see how we can support them. We have had, unfortunately, in Glasgow recently, we've had 15 EAL teachers have been cut by the current Labour administration, and despite the best efforts of the opposition within Glasgow City Council, we have these posts have gone, so that has been a major blow. What I would like to say is that we need to be looking at the benefits that are brought by these pupils. In terms of immigration and migration, there's been a £20 billion net benefit for us for having EU immigrants within our country and within our communities, and it's important that we remember that. I will say again, though, we need to look at how we are actually going to fully include them in our schools and in their training. The Westminster APPG on modern languages stated speaking only English is as much of a disadvantage as speaking no English at all. And I think it's very important that in terms of intellectual development and in terms of pupil attainment, having multilingual pupils is a benefit and makes a great educational makes great educational sense. I will agree with the honourable member that unless we support teachers and support schools and support local education authorities to provide the proper environment where these pupils can learn, then we will have issues with that.
Thank you for the Honourable Lady for giving way. And I realise this isn't an issue affecting Scotland, but the English Baccalaureate is a combination of GCSEs, including a modern language. Would she support this government's endeavours to get all pupils to be taking that combination of GCSEs to the age of 16 to ensure that we have more young people taking a foreign language to GCSE?
I think the taking of languages at GCSE is a matter for the pupils at that point in their school career. The baccalaureate system is a really robust system where they're looking at different areas and have specialisms in different subjects, which is a really positive qualification. I think the issue is more about language learning in the early years, and I think the huge benefits are if we can get either whatever these additional languages are, that English may be the additional language for some of these pupils, French, Spanish, Gaelic might be the additional language for other pupils, but I think the way we go about language learning is not conducive to real deep understanding of that learning. The language learning must take place far earlier and must be far more serious than it is at the moment. We start picking these up at age 11 and 12, and that's why the Scottish Government is introducing at a much earlier stage at primary level this language learning, so that we can actually start looking at wider language learning. So I would like to just finish by saying, talk once again about the positive impact in our schools of having pupils with additional languages, be it Polish, be it Urdu, be it Gaelic. In terms of attainment, this is positive, and we welcome these pupils in our schools. What is important is that we put in place structures that are going to allow them to learn properly and actually access the education that we are providing for them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hollowbone, and it's an extremely pleasant experience to be serving under your chairmanship once again. And can I congratulate once again the Honourable Member for Peterborough on securing this very important debate. He set the debate on fire when he spoke, or rather the fire alarm at least went off when he started speaking. And it might be a good idea, Mr. Hollowbone, if you might make representations to the House authorities on that matter, that if they want to test the fire alarms, perhaps they could do so when we're not debating in this chamber, if it just is a routine test. But that interruption didn't stop him from making a very compelling case about the issues faced in his own part of the country with regard to the numbers of children in schools with English as an additional language. And I'd like to say from the outset, and I think this is the tone that's been adopted by honourable members, that we should celebrate the diversity of our country, the cultural richness that there is in the UK as a result of immigration, and also, you know, the undoubted benefits to education that come from having such a diverse population. And yes, there are challenges, obviously, which we're debating this morning, but also we shouldn't let the moment pass without celebrating that cultural diversity and richness which is brought by immigration to this country and has been for many, many hundreds of years. He talked in his remarks about the pupil premium, and he described the practical challenges that the abolition of the Ethnic Minority Achievement Grant, I think, are beginning to cause in the system, the pressures that are coming about as a result of getting rid of that ring-fenced pupil numbers-based approach to tackling issues around the around English as an additional language. And what I would say is that, you know, if the Ethnic Minority Achievement Grant wasn't perfect and wasn't perfectly targeted, which I'm sure might be the case, that doesn't take away from the fact that the approach, I think, was the right one in principle, namely to try and offer additional support based on the numbers and the challenges being faced by schools in different parts of the country. I certainly would. Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving way. This has been interesting given my background with some interest in doing educational research in the past. Everyone in here has talked very eloquently about the need for teachers development, having the ability to support pupils. I would ask the Honourable Member if he would agree that it goes beyond even the teaching profession. In Scotland, for example, we are blessed by having a range of speech and language therapists who are well qualified, many of whom have specialisms in dealing with pupils, particularly at the primary stages, with multilingual assets, if you like. And so that we need to think, if we're going to support these pupils, more than simply the teaching profession itself, we need to think of those specialists who surround the teaching profession who can give further support.
Yes, I do very much agree with his remarks, and of course speech and language therapists play a very important role in other parts of the United Kingdom as well, and I've always been a very strong believer in providing services around the child, beyond the school, and it was very much part of the children's plan, which was something which I was involved in drawing up under the last government, and I recommend it to him for when he has some spare time to do some additional research, which is his background. And of course he'll be aware as a researcher also, bearing in mind some of the other comments in our debate of Professor Steve Strand and Professor Victoria Murphy of the University of Oxford, who've done extensive research into the impact of English as an additional language in classrooms, which show that some of the lurid stories in the popular press about the fact that this is having a negative impact on the education of other children is in fact completely wrong when you look actually at the evidence, and in fact the contrary is the case. I was saying, Mr. Hollowbone, that I think that the case has been made quite strongly by the honourable member for looking again at the need perhaps to have some sort of ring-fenced budget in this regard. And I would urge the Minister to set aside, I know he has a pathological dislike of anything that's ring-fenced or directs schools to act in a particular manner, and an almost religious faith that they will always do the right thing under any circumstances. But actually, there is a case, as the honourable member's made out, to look at this again, and I hope he will set aside his usual dislike of these things to look at it with an open mind. And he quoted the Minister's words at the end of the debate last night, and all I can say is that fine words, are all very well, but you have to will the means, ultimately, for a policy to have an impact. There has to be a transmissions mechanism for a policy to actually translate into action on the ground. And unless we will the means, and unless government takes a lead on this, I'm afraid the problem will continue to grow, because the budget system that's in place at this time does not give the incentive or the necessary direction to make sure that resources are spent in this area. The honourable member for Glasgow North West spoke, and I once again congratulate her on her maiden speech last night in the House, and I'm sorry because of the early hour at which the wind-up started that I wasn't able to do so with her present at the time. It was not her fault, it was entirely an unexpected development. I will give way.
I actually was there. It was the honourable member for Kilmarnock and Loudon who wasn't there. So,
well, I apologise. Not only I apologise to the honourable member in that case. Clearly, my memory's going if I can't even remember what was happening last evening. But I do remember her maiden speech, and it was a very fine maiden speech, and I congratulate her once again on it. She pointed out the benefits of attainment of having more than one language, and I completely agree with that. Not least since my own daughter attended Welsh medium school and benefited greatly from it, as I did. It greatly improved my own Welsh, Mr. Hollowbone, as a result of her attendance at school. And she pointed out that there are parts of Scotland, where the Gaelic language is very predominant, including the constituency of her honourable friend, the member for Nahealan and Yard, who often reminds us of that in the chamber. English as an additional language needs to be no hindrance, as she quite rightly pointed out. And in fact, the opposite can be of great benefit to educational attainment. Now, Mr. Hollowbone, as of June 2015, there were 1.2 million children in England, that's 17.2% of all pupils, who have a first language other than English. And until April 2011, as we've heard, the Ethnic Minority Achievement Grant, which was set up originally in 1999, provided funding based on numbers of children from underachieving ethnic minority groups and of pupils with English as an additional language. And it was then, around 2011, that grant amounted to about £200 million of support across the country. Now, of course, that's been absorbed into the school grant, and as ever when these things are absorbed, somehow or other some money falls from the table, and I'm sure ultimately that the amount of money that's there within the Direct Schools grant may or may not reflect that funding, but certainly it's the case that schools can now receive additional money for pupils with English as an additional language from their local authority and school forums, and it's the school forums that decide on a local level if any school receives an English as an additional language factor to their funding due to the number of those pupils. And the government's minimum funding, Mr Hollowbone, in 2015-16 school year was £466 for primary and £1,130 for secondary. That's what they've identified would need to be spent. But the problem is, Mr Hollowbone, there's no compulsion for local authorities to include an EAL factor in their funding, nor for the value of this to be at the minimum level or above. The funding rules of the government stipulate that the factor can only be paid for the first 3 years of compulsory schooling with respect to the pupil with English as an additional language. And that's an odd stipulation, given the government's professed desire actually to allow schools at a local level to decide what they think is the right thing to do and what's the best thing to do. And I hope the Minister can explain why that rule is still in place. Academy schools, of course, receive their funding via the EFA, which uses the same funding formula as the local authority. So funding levels for children mirror neighbouring maintained schools. However, of course, there's considerable variation from local authority to local authority about ELA funding. And under this system, if we can call it a system, there's no accountability mechanism whatsoever regarding schools' use of this funding. And it essentially means that schools are not obliged in any way to use this funding to meet the needs of pupils with English as an additional language. Now, there's a very interesting report by the Education Endowment Foundation, and this is a point of agreement between myself and the Schools Minister, although with regard to last night's debate, perhaps he should be renamed the Academies Minister, since maintained schools never get a mention or any praise whatsoever from the government in their speeches in the House. Perhaps he'll correct that in future. But there's one point of agreement between us, and that is that the Education Endowment Foundation is a very good initiative, and the government has provided support to it, and we very much support the fact that the government has provided support for it, because in a sense it's the beginnings of what I was talking about in last night's debate, Mr Holling, of a sort of NICE for education, a National Institute of Clear Evidence, as I called it. And the Education Endowment Foundation looks at the research evidence for what works in education policy, and that is extremely welcome, since so much of education policy seems to be based on think tank quackery. And the Education Endowment Foundation's report into English as an additional language is very interesting. It had some key findings. One was that the attainment of pupils with English as an additional language varies very widely. At the end of reception, only 44% of EAL pupils are recorded as having achieved a good level of development, compared with 54% of non-EAL pupils. However, that does narrow, and we would expect it to, Mr Hollowbone, it does narrow considerably by the age of 16, when it's down to 58.3% of EAL pupils achieving 5 A-star to C GCSEs, compared with 60.9% of non-EAL pupils. And by some measures, EAL pupils actually do better, and often, particularly in relation to mathematics, they do so. But what that masks, in a way, is what the report interestingly points out, Mr Hollowbone, is that there's a huge range of outcomes within that for different groups of EAL pupils. And of course that makes sense, because there's going to be a very big difference between a pupil classed as having English with an additional language, who is the son or daughter of a French banker living in London, and with some of the pupils that the Honourable Gentleman described in the course of his remarks, who are not coming with those sorts of advantages when they go to school for the first time in this country. And in addition, it points out that these are the factors which determine whether or not they're more significantly likely to underachieve. These are the factors, Mr Hollowbone. Entry to England from abroad during a key stage at school. Such EAL pupils tend to be about a year behind their non-EAL peers. Change in school during a key stage at school is a very significant factor. Those who joined their primary school in years 5 to 6 had very significantly lower achievement than those who joined in years 3 and 4. Being from particular ethnic minority groups also had an impact on their outcome. Particularly at age 16, this impacted on speakers of Somali, Lingala and Lithuanian. And it also found that almost half of schools with a majority of EAL pupils are located outside London. And I think that emphasises the point that the Honourable Gentleman was making, that we shouldn't simply think of this as an issue that has an impact in London. It also pointed out that a high proportion of EAL pupils in a school does not have a negative impact on the attainment and progress of other pupils. So it's very useful to be able to have the research evidence, and there's other evidence I quoted earlier that confirms that myth is incorrect. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Now, you've just said that it doesn't have a negative impact on the other pupils. My experience was actually it had an extremely positive impact on the other pupils, and in fact having these pupils in their class gave them something to aim for, because they were seeing a different way in which students could work. So it really had a huge advantage.
That is my own experience, but I'm quoting the academic research here in an attempt to sort of, get us into the habit of using evidence to make education policy something that's sort of disappeared in recent years, I'm afraid. And it's backed up, this research backed up the research I quoted earlier on from the University of Oxford, because the study finds that the percentage of EAL pupils in a school has a minimal association with student attainment and progress once student background is taken into account. So once those factors are taken out, the point is that yes, obviously it brings that richness and cultural diversity, but also it doesn't impact on attainment according to the Education Endowment Foundation's research. And as a result of their research, Mr. Hollowbone, they make certain recommendations, which I hope the Minister, in his remarks, because I know he'll be intimately aware of the details of the research, being so briefed so well by his excellent civil servants, I hope that he will respond in his remarks, because he's likely to have a little bit of time to do so, to the recommendations that are made in the Education Endowment Foundation report. And the recommendations it makes are, first of all, that schools should be accountable for showing attainment impact. The report says that schools should be held accountable for how their EAL funding contributes to improving pupil attainment, in the same way that they're accountable for pupil premium, as the Honourable Member was pointed out earlier on. Now, if they are to be held to account for how they spend the pupil premium, surely there should be a way to hold schools to account for how they use public money, resources provided for the specific purpose of helping pupils with English as an additional language, even if they are not actually told exactly how many pennies they have to spend in their particular location. Surely there should be some way in which they can be held account to whether they're doing what that public money is intended for. Because the report, although the report finds that where EAL pupils have attended schools for a whole of a key stage, they make greater progress than non-EAL pupils, and they tend to catch up by the age of 16, it does reflect a long period of considerable additional funding having been directed to address those language learning needs. So it might be that there's considerable under-attainment going on among specific groups, which is masked, Mr. Hollowbone, by that general finding. So we need the government to listen to that recommendation. Their second recommendation, which follows clearly on from the first one, is that EAL funding should be targeted at those who are most at risk of under-attainment. And again, the problem is that the definition there currently is of EAL, Mr. Hollowbone, doesn't really reflect the indication of a student's proficiency in the English language, or their exposure, if you like, to it at home. And schools need to do more to identify how they, or if you like, hone how they identify the language and learning needs of children within the EAL category, to make sure that the funds are actually being targeted at those who most need it. And government should do the same, because it will be able to identify those parts of the country where that is a particular problem. And I think the Minister should reflect on that and consider what action should be taken in order to do that. Because obviously for some pupils, the 3-year barrier, the 3-year sort of cap on when additional support can be available might be more than they need because of the factors associated with how proficient they're likely to become in the English language, including their home life and background. Whereas for other pupils, the length of time that they're likely to need is likely to be considerably more than 3 years. And the research evidence clearly shows that it will take longer than 3 years of the allocated funding for some pupils. And that's why I don't understand the government's rigidity about the 3-year rule when it seems to philosophically be in favour of being more flexible about funding. So there's a strong case for additional funding to be made available to schools with such EAL pupils to ensure they're able to achieve their full potential. And I'll quote Professor Strand's report, which I mentioned earlier on. Fluency in English is, and there's an ellipsis at that point for the benefit of the Hansard writers in my quote, the biggest factor influencing the degree of support an individual student will require, and schools need to be able to assess this need accurately using their own procedures and expertise. Now, the third major finding of the Education Endowment Fund's report, Mr. Hollowbone, is that more research is needed into the best strategies to deal with EAL pupils, because there is a lack of robust research evidence in this area to the correct approaches and interventions to raise the attainment of EAL pupils. There's no randomized controlled tests or studies where the effectiveness of the intervention was evaluated by an independent review team. So it's certainly the case that more research needs to be done into this, and I hope that the Minister can indicate his view on that and whether or not the department is helping to facilitate, undertake or fund any research in this particular area in order to try to make sure that such public resources as are being allocated to this are getting to the right pupils and having the correct impact. So I'd just like to... I will give way, yes, of course.
I have no wish to be particularly disobliging to the honourable gentleman, but his third point is there's not enough research about the impact of EAL on educational attainment, and yet he blithely earlier says and agrees with the Honourable Lady for Glasgow North West that EAL pupils of themselves are a good thing vis-à-vis educational attainment for other children who aren't EAL. I mean, you can't have it both ways. There's either robust empirical evidence to support the former, or he's right on the latter. It can't be both.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman's never disobliging. Can I just put that on the record, Mr. Hollowbone? I'll examine the record very carefully. I think what I've said has been internally consistent throughout the debate, but I will check earlier on just in case I have actually contradicted myself. And if I have done so, I'll give myself a good talking to later on. But I think actually I was completely consistent in what I've said throughout my remarks, namely that that such research as there is indicates that it doesn't have a negative impact on others in the classroom. However, that the third conclusion, which he attributed to me, which actually is the conclusion of the Education Endowment Foundation, the body funded by the government to provide us with this sort of research, actually their third conclusion is that more research is needed into the best strategies to improve outcomes for pupils with EAL. So, Mr. Hollowbone, just to conclude, what assessment has the government made? I wonder if the Minister could tell us of the disparities in EAL pupil achievement, and what are they doing to help these at-risk children? What's the government doing to address the fact that pupils that enter into schools at years 5 and 6 don't achieve as well as EAL pupils that enter into schools in years 3 and 4, and the fact that that children entering into schools from abroad at a key stage in school on average are 12 months behind their non-EAL peers? What's the government doing to encourage better research and support better research into these issues which affect over 1 million children, Mr. Hollowbone? And will the government also look more generally at the impact of, and the Honourable Lady mentioned this, the impact of bilingual education? There's experiences from within the United Kingdom, obviously in Scotland and in Wales, and now the beginnings of that in Northern Ireland too. And given his support for free schools and so on, is he now still rigidly opposed to bilingualism in schools, which has been the government's position up until now? But I understand it may be beginning to take away or reduce that opposition, providing that it's one of their favoured free schools that is advocating bilingual education. What is the government's current position on bilingual education, and has it changed?
Before I call the Minister, could I just gently remind him that under the new rules, Mr Jackson gets a second go. So if the Minister would be kind enough to conclude his remarks no later than 10:57. Minister.
I'm grateful for that guidance, Mr Hollowburn. It is a pleasure again to serve under your chairmanship, though even your powerful chairmanship, were unable to stop the disembodied voice from engaging in our debate. And I'll be interested to see how Hansard reports an unelected person taking part in our debate this morning. Can I also congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Peterborough, on securing this important debate and on his excellent speech in introducing the debate. As always, he campaigns effectively and argues coherently and persuasively for the interests of his constituency and his constituents. Now, the government, Mr Hollowburn, is committed to social justice, as my honourable friend acknowledges and supports and campaigns for himself. And it does mean that we want all pupils to achieve their full potential, including those with English as an additional language. But I do understand the very real challenges of local authorities like Peterborough in delivering this objective. Now, the definition of English as an additional language is broad. It reflects a pupil's exposure to a language other than English at home. It gives no indication of a pupil's proficiency in the English language. Some may use English as their everyday language and be fluent in it. Others may be new to Britain with very little English. The percentage of pupils in England who are recorded as having English as an additional language has more than doubled between 1997 and 2014, from 7.6% to 16.6%, with enormous variations across the country. In the southwest, just 6% of pupils have English as an additional language, compared to 56% in London. There's also a great deal of variation between individual schools. Over half of schools have fewer than 5% of their pupils with English as an additional language, but 8% of schools have a majority of such pupils. And the evidence shows that whilst pupils with English as an additional language face disadvantages early in their school careers, as has been cited by other honourable members, they're not on average at a significant long-term disadvantage. But again, there is variation in attainment levels. And as the honourable member for Glasgow North West, swift on the heels of her excellent maiden speech last night, as she pointed out, learning 2 or 3 languages aids educational attainment, not just in languages, but in other subjects too. So we must ensure that we are supporting all children to achieve their full potential and overcome barriers to success, whatever those barriers are. And we must recognise that there are communities with very high numbers of pupils with English as an additional language that face particular challenges, and therefore welcome my honourable friend's focus on this issue. The average performance of pupils who do speak English as a second language is significantly lower than the average for all pupils at the beginning of their schooling, but significantly improved by the end of Key Stage 4. The latest data shows that around 67% of pupils with English as an additional language achieved 5 or more good GCSEs, grades A to C, compared to around 66% of all pupils. And there are examples of local authorities with very high proportions of pupils who speak English as a second language that perform well against national averages for attainment. For example, in Newham, where 76% of pupils at Key Stage 2 in primary school have English as a second language, 83% of pupils achieved the expected levels in reading, writing and maths at that stage. And that exceeds the national average across the country for all Key Stage pupils, which is 79%. In fact, in 2013-14, of the 18 local authorities where more than half of pupils at Key Stage 2 had English as an additional language, all but 2 had attainment levels above the all-pupil national average. And Mr. Hollowburn, I do remember visiting Fullbridge Academy in 2011, and I was struck, and I have remembered it ever since, that was the first school that I had been to in 2011 where all the primary school pupils that I tested on their multiplication tables knew them. And I have to say it has increased steadily over the years since then, but I was very struck by that particular primary school visit, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for taking me there. But unfortunately, we don't see English, the pupils with additional language performing this well across the whole country. While 79% of EAL pupils in Westminster achieve 5 or more good GCSEs at grades A star to C, only half, 50%, of pupils with English as an additional language in Bradford are achieving at the same level. And the disparity in the quality of education available to pupils in different parts of the country has driven us to reform the school system. We've taken steps to ensure that every child, regardless of their particular needs or background, has a greater opportunity of attaining well at school than was the case before 2010. There are now more than 1 million pupils more. There are now more than 1 million more pupils in good or outstanding schools than there were in 2010. We've intervened in over 1,000 weak and failing schools and are delivering improvements in their performance by matching them with academy sponsors. And these academies have transformed the life chances of thousands of pupils. Take, for example, King Solomon Academy. King Solomon is an all-through school sponsored by ARC schools, and over half the pupils are eligible for free school meals, and 65% don't have English as a first language. And in its report last year, Ofsted found the school to be outstanding, and reporting that, and I quote, achievement is outstanding at all key stages. All groups of pupils, including those who have special needs, make excellent progress. The Academy is working to provide even greater challenge to the most able pupils. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Can I join him in congratulating the Academy on that achievement? Could he bring himself, just for once in his remarks right now, to give some praise to a maintained school that has improved its performance?
Yes, there are many examples of maintained schools that have also improved. I'll come to that when in my own good time. But there are many maintained schools that have improved their standard. But what we are unapologetic about is taking the Labour policy of taking underperforming schools and turning them into sponsored academies. And what I can't understand is the ambiguity in Labour's position now regarding the academies programme. It is proven highly effective in raising standards, and all we hear from the Labour Party is this sort of carping and criticism of a policy that actually began life under Lord Adonis under the last Labour government. There are many maintained schools. My hesitation, of course, is that 60% of secondary schools now are academies, and schools that I may remember and recall as being maintained schools may well have converted, because good and outstanding schools up and down the country are rushing to convert to academy status. Many of those performed extremely well as maintained schools run by local authorities, and they are performing well now as academies. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Minister for giving way. In Scotland, we don't have academies, although some schools may have the word academy in their title. We have comprehensive schools, or we have private schools. Would the Minister agree that the success of a school is not down to its name, but actually is down to leadership within that school and the systems that are put in place to ensure both staff and pupils are supported fully?
I agree that it's not to do with the name of a school, but there is something in the autonomy and freedoms that academy status brings that enables innovation and professional autonomy to raise standards. And if I can quote again from King Solomon's Academy, run by some remarkable young people, most of whom are Teach First teachers. The head teacher, Max Heimendorf, became a head teacher, I think, in his late 20s. And in that school, when it had its first GCSE results in 2014, 93% of those pupils achieved 5 or more good GCSEs, including English and Maths. And if you recall the very high levels of deprivation that school serves, 93% is a remarkable result wherever the school is located, but particularly so given where it's located. And 75% of those pupils at that school achieved the English Baccalaureate, and they had high levels of achievement in the English Baccalaureate across the ability range in that school. I'll give way to Honourable Lady again.
I thank the Minister for giving way again. And he mentioned some staff members, a head teacher and some obviously inspiring teachers. Does the Minister suggest then, if that hadn't been an academy, that it would not have had the same success given the staff that it has in position?
Well, I do. I don't think we would have had King Solomon's Academy delivering that kind of educational attainment in that part of London had there not been the Academy's programme. And I think it's the freedoms, the autonomy, the approach that school takes to the way it teaches its children is very different from any local authority school that I have visited. And I don't believe that they would have been able to do that had the school been run directly by the local authority in that area. Now, there is, of course, Mr. Holborn, more to do. And although the overall quality of education in England has dramatically improved, 1.5 million pupils are still taught in schools that are less than good. The Education Adoption Bill we debated last night, and which received its second reading, will strengthen our ability to deal with failure and to do so much more swiftly. The measures within it are designed to speed up the process by which the least well-performing schools are transformed in order to bring about rapid and sustained improvements, making sure every child gets the best start in life. And we've made it very clear that we want to improve the literacy proficiency of all pupils, and in particular, improving the teaching of reading is a key priority for this government. And our aim is to help every child become a confident, fluent and enthusiastic reader. And the latest available data shows that 84% of pupils for whom English is an additional language achieved level 4 or above in reading at Key Stage 2 in 2014. And this is just below the national average for all pupils, which is 89%. And this shows that we still have further to go if we want every child to be reading well by the age of 11. And key to our approach, and the Honourable Gentleman will be expecting me to use these words, is the use of systematic phonics instruction. The evidence shows that systematic phonics is the most effective approach to teaching early reading, and the latest phonics screening check results show that across the country there is a difference of less than half a percentage point between pupils whose first language is not English and those whose first language is English. And phonics has been used to great effect in local authorities such as Newham, where in Year 1, 3 times as many pupils have EAL as those who don't. 81% of all Newham's pupils met the expected phonics standard, well above the national average of 74%. And at secondary school, we are ensuring that all pupils will study the core academic subjects of English, Maths, Science, History, Geography and a language, the English Baccalaureate. And we already know that pupils with English as an additional language are above the national average for entry and achievement of the English Baccalaureate. And last year, 41% of pupils with English as an additional language entered the EBAC and 26% achieved it, compared to 39% of all pupils entering it and around 24% achieving it. We want more pupils, actually, including those for whom English is an additional language, to be achieving the EBAC. These subjects give young people a strong foundation for progress, for further study and for work, and it helps to keep young people's options open. Now, I want to turn, if I can, briefly, Mr. Holborn, to the issue of funding, which my honourable friend focused on. We have also supported local authorities to provide additional support for EAL pupils in their local funding formula. And local authorities can provide additional funding to pupils who speak a language other than or in addition to English and who enter the school system in the past 3 years, something that the Honourable Gentleman also touched on. The vast majority of local authorities include EAL as a factor in their funding formula. 132 local authorities allocated funding to schools teaching 450,000 pupils with English as an additional language in 2015-16, and this totals some £267 million, with schools receiving on average about £591 for each pupil that speaks English as an additional language. So we also recognise that EAL pupils are more likely to be mobile and arrive in school during the academic year. Local authorities can hold money centrally to support the growth in the number of pupils below the age of 16 in schools, and this growth fund allows local authorities to top up funding in year for schools experiencing an increase in pupil numbers due to growth in the local population. And local authorities also have the power to use a mobility factor in their funding formula, and this method allows funds to be allocated to schools with a high proportion of pupils entering in year in the previous 3 years. And 66 local authorities used this factor in 2015-16, allocating a total of £24 million through that formula. And in Peterborough, Mr. Hollowbone, 18% of pupils have English as an additional language. It's the 23rd largest proportion of pupils with English as an additional language amongst all the different authorities. The area has seen a rise of over 5,000 of such pupils in its schools from 2014-15, and I note that Peterborough City Council allocated something like £3.7 million for pupils with English as an additional language in 2015-16 and has a growth fund of about £2.25 million. So, Mr. Hollowbone, I'm enormously grateful for the support my honourable friend has given to this issue today and for raising it. He has raised some important concerns. The steps that we have taken underline our ambition to give more pupils the preparation to succeed in school, whether that's getting a place at a good university, starting an apprenticeship, or finding their first job. They will provide the foundations of an educational system with social justice at its heart, in which every young person reaches the potential. And I congratulate my honourable friend once again for airing this very important debate.
Thank you, Mr. Hollowbone. Obviously, we've had a very wide-ranging debate. I've been privileged to sit in on this Labour and SNP seminar on structures in modern British education, which unfortunately is a little bit of an obsession, particularly by Her Majesty's opposition, even though it's very eloquently and charmingly articulated by the Honourable Gentleman for Cardiff West. So the substantive point, though, I think has been touched on by the Minister, my honourable friend, but I'd just like to leave him with this thought. Given that, as I made clear in my remarks, there has been an evolution in the way pupil premium has been used to drive up attainment, is it not possible that there could be a competitive system, a bidding process of LEAs that have developed bespoke solutions like Peterborough that are successful and have achieved good results under their own steam financially, that they could bid for money ring-fenced, albeit that the Minister doesn't like ring-fenced funding, and that there's a competitive element so that the government rewards best practice and tackles these very long-standing endemic issues in order to achieve what he laudably aims to do, which is improve social justice and educational outcomes. I'll leave him with those thoughts. And finally, to also say he's more than welcome to come to Peterborough, and I look forward to either him and or the Secretary of State coming at some time in the next few years.
The question is that this House has considered government policy on support for pupils with English as an additional language. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I suspend the sitting until 11 o'clock. Order, order.